This story is based on real patterns I've seen again and again. He seemed perfect, not in an obvious way, not loud, not flashy, just attentive. He remembered the smallest things, the way she took her coffee, the song she said she loved when she was 16, the story about her father that she only told once. He looked at her like she was rare, like she was something he had been searching for, and for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. He texted good morning every day, he called at night just to hear her voice. He asked questions most people never asked, and when she spoke he listened. Not just politely, deeply. She thought, this is different. And maybe it was. But sometimes when something feels too perfect, too quickly, it isn't connection, it's construction. When someone mirrors you perfectly in the beginning, they may not be revealing themselves. They may be building an image. At first she didn't see anything wrong. Why would she? He was kind. He was thoughtful. He was emotionally available. Or at least he seemed to be. Then one night it happened. They were laughing. She teased him lightly about something small. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, and his tone shifted. You're kind of sensitive about stuff like that, aren't you? It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was subtle. She laughed it off. But something inside her tightened. The first crack in the mask is rarely dramatic. It usually sounds like a joke. She told herself she was overthinking. Maybe she was sensitive. Maybe she misunderstood. After all, he had been so good to her, so consistent, so attentive. A few days later, she noticed something else. He didn't text all day. No explanation. When she asked if everything was okay, he replied hours later, "Why are you always assuming something's wrong?" She paused. She wasn't assuming anything. She had just asked a question. But suddenly she felt guilty. Suddenly she felt needy. When you start explaining yourself to someone who used to understand you effortlessly, something has shifted. She began adjusting, speaking softer, choosing her words carefully, watching his reactions. He still had his good days, days where he was warm again, affectionate, almost like the beginning. And those days confused her the most, because they proved he could be that man, which made her believe the coldness must somehow be her fault. Hot and cold doesn't create distance, it creates dependency. You don't detach, you try harder. One night, she brought up something that had been bothering her. Nothing dramatic, just a pattern she'd noticed. His face changed. The warmth disappeared instantly. "You're twisting things. I never said that. You're imagining it." The conversation spun in circles. By the end of it, she was apologizing for something she couldn't even clearly define. Gaslighting doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just rearranges reality quietly. After that night, something inside her shifted. Not completely, but enough. She started second-guessing her memory, replaying conversations in her head, checking old messages to see if she misunderstood. And strangely, the more uncertain she became, the more confident he seemed. He started correcting her tone, correcting her words, correcting her feelings. "You're overreacting. You always do this. Why can't you just relax?" She began shrinking, not dramatically, but gradually. She stopped bringing things up, stopped teasing, stopped disagreeing. She told herself relationships require compromise, but compromise isn't the same as self-erasure. And slowly she was disappearing. The man who once admired her independence now called it stubbornness. The man who once praised her honesty now called it dramatic. He hadn't changed overnight. He had revealed himself in layers. Masks don't fall all at once. They slip, then slide, then shatter, but not yet. At this point, it was only slipping, and she was still trying to hold it in place, because believing the truth would hurt more than doubting herself. And so she stayed, adjusting, explaining, hoping the perfect version of him would return. But what she didn't understand yet was this: the perfect version wasn't real. It was performance, and performances end. By this point, she wasn't fighting him, she was fighting herself. Fighting the doubt, fighting the anxiety, fighting the feeling that something wasn't right, but she couldn't prove it. That's the hardest part. When the harm isn't loud, it's confusing. He still held her hand in public, still told her she was beautiful, still said, "You're the only one I've ever felt this close to." And yet, she felt alone. One evening, she noticed he had been distant all week. Short replies, long silences, eyes glued to his phone. She didn't accuse him. She didn't demand anything. She just asked softly, "Are we okay?" That's when it happened. The shift. His jaw tightened. His voice hardened. "You're exhausting." The word landed heavier than she expected. Exhausting. She replayed it in her head. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't accusing. She was asking. But somehow she had become the problem. When someone reacts with anger to a calm question, it's not about the question. It's about control. He stood up, started listing her issues. "You're insecure. You overthink everything. You're too emotional." Each sentence hit like a quiet slap, not because it was loud, but because it felt rehearsed, as if he had been collecting these criticisms, waiting. The mask doesn't slip during chaos, it slips when you threaten the narrative. She tried to stay calm, tried to explain she just wanted reassurance. He laughed, not kindly, not playfully, cold. "If you can't handle a normal relationship, maybe you shouldn't be in one." That was the moment. Not dramatic, not explosive, but clear. The warmth she once saw in his eyes was gone, replaced with something sharper, something detached, and for the first time, she felt small, not flawed, not imperfect, small. When someone makes you feel smaller instead of safer, the dynamic has shifted. She went quiet, not because she agreed, but because she was tired. Tired of defending her emotions, tired of justifying her needs, tired of trying to access the version of him that once felt so real. And here's the painful truth. That version was real, just not sustainable. It was strategic. Love bombing isn't about affection. It's about positioning. He had studied her in the beginning, her fears, her desires, her past wounds. And he had mirrored everything she needed. Because when you feel deeply understood, you attach deeply. Attachment is leverage in the wrong hands. The next days were colder. He withdrew affection, less touching, less eye contact, less warmth, but if she pulled away, he would lean back in. A sudden hug, a long message about how much he cared. Just enough to reset her hope. Intermittent reinforcement doesn't weaken attachment. It strengthens it. She began walking on eggshells, monitoring her tone, monitoring his mood, trying to predict the next shift. Hyper-awareness replaced comfort, and anxiety replaced peace. One night, she finally said it. "This doesn't feel healthy." Silence. He stared at her like she had insulted him. "Wow," he said slowly. "So now I'm toxic?" She never used that word. But somehow the conversation twisted. She was suddenly accusing, overreacting, destroying something good. Projection turns your clarity into attack. She started doubting herself again. Maybe she was dramatic. Maybe she expected too much. Maybe she sabotaged good things. That's the quiet power of psychological control. It doesn't cage you. It convinces you to cage yourself. Then came the final slip. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even loud. They were at dinner. She mentioned a story about a male coworker. Innocent, casual, his expression changed instantly. Not jealous, not insecure, cold, controlled. When they got to the car, he spoke. "If you ever disrespect me like that again, we're done." Her heart dropped. She had done nothing wrong. But his tone wasn't angry. It was authoritarian. That was the first time she felt fear. Not of losing him, of him. When affection turns into intimidation, the mask has fallen. And this time, it didn't slide back into place. The sweetness didn't return. The warmth didn't reappear. He didn't apologize. He acted as if nothing had happened. And that might be the most destabilizing part. The calm after cruelty. She sat alone later that night, replaying everything. The beginning, the shift, the jokes, the corrections, the anger. And for the first time, she allowed a new thought. What if this was who he always was? What if the perfect man wasn't the real one? What if this version, controlled, dismissive, intimidating, was the baseline? When the illusion breaks, grief begins. Not just grief for the relationship, but grief for the fantasy. She realized something painful. She had been trying to earn back a version of him that was never permanent. You can't win back a mask. You can only accept what's underneath it. And underneath there was control. There was insecurity. There was a need to dominate, not love. Control feels powerful. Love feels safe. She began to see the pattern, the idealization, the devaluation, the confusion, the control, and the subtle rewriting of reality. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the moment the power dynamic shifts, not when he changes, when you do. Because the mask slipping isn't the most important moment. The most important moment is when you stop pretending you didn't see it. And here's the part many people don't talk about. When you finally pull away, that's when his behavior often escalates, not because he loves you, but because control is slipping. And in the next part of this series, we're going to talk about what happens when you stop reacting and he realizes he's losing control, because that's when the real panic begins.